So good morning. Thank you everyone for being here. Before we get started, I just want to draw attention to this link at the bottom here, this bit.ly link, bit.ly/RTFM-JM. There's a bunch of resources there that I'm going to mention. During this talk, I'm going to talk about a couple of blog posts and articles and things like that, and you can find links to them there. So I start all of my technical talks with a slide like this, introducing myself and handing out my contact information. And I always tell people, if you have any questions about anything that we talked about today or anything else that you think I could help you with, please do not hesitate to contact me. I will help you, or I will try to find someone who can help you. And I do that because I love helping other people. Knowing that I was able to do something that made someone's day better, made their job easier, helped them grow, made them more successful, that is the whole reason that I do this, why I come to conferences and talk. But that wasn't always true for me. So I've known that I wanted to be a programmer since I was in high school. Before that, I wanted to be a math teacher. So I was doing a program that my high school offered for an advanced degree in math, and there was a programming class, which was a math credit. So I took it. And I remember I would come home every day excitedly telling my dad about what I had learned in class that day. And finally one day he said to me, "You know this is what you're going to do, right?" He was a software developer, and I think that he could see that thing in me that needed to solve problems. And when I graduated, I didn't really feel like college was right for me, so I bounced around a little bit and I ended up in Dallas, Texas. And I started learning how to make better websites. I learned PHP, I learned MySQL, started learning a little JavaScript. This was back when there was like MooTools and jQuery, right? And I started working as a programmer. And over several years, I learned as much as I could. I would jump on any chance to learn a new technology. The approach that I took to programming was that literally anything was possible. You just had to figure out how to do it. So the problem was I didn't really know how to do it yet, but I did it well enough to fool people into thinking that I did know. So when people hear that I didn't go to college, I often get asked how I learned to be a programmer. A lot of the beginner stuff was easy for me to learn on my own. There's syntax, there's built-in functions, how to use frameworks and libraries. A lot of that information is well documented and it's easily available. I learned a lot through trial and error, reading blogs, Googling things. I also spent a lot of time on forums. There was a PHP forum I had joined, and I became one of the top contributors, often answering questions about how to escape SQL queries, helping people debug their code, things like that. I also joined Stack Overflow and became a top contributor on there. Have you ever used Stack Overflow or a forum or some site like that? Yeah. Have you ever gotten an answer to a question that just said RTFM? So I like to explain RTFM to non-technical folks as simply read the manual. Or as Eleanor from The Good Place would say, read the forking manual. Now, if you don't get this joke, please go start watching The Good Place. It's available on Hulu. I hope it's available over here. It's a great show. The premise of the show is that the main character, Eleanor, has died, and she's been accidentally sent to the good place, even though she's a horrible person. She often tries to curse, but of course you can't curse in the good place, so she says forking a lot. Anyway, sometimes RTFM is all you get as an answer. Sometimes it's more detailed with a little link to the documentation. Sometimes it's in the form of Google it or look it up. Sometimes it's a lot harsher, right? People who answer questions this way often defend it, saying that they're actually trying to help that person learn how to ask better questions, do more research on their own, right? There's a little bit of truth to that, in that if you know you're not going to get help or you'll be made fun of for asking, you're less likely to ask that question. So you might spend a lot more time trying to figure it out, banging your head against the wall. Maybe you'll give up. Maybe you'll stop asking questions. These sites actually have a ton of knowledge, right? The best case scenario is that you search for your question and it's already been answered by someone else. And then you don't have to be the one to ask it. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have to ask, and sometimes you never get an answer. But sometimes you do get answers, and you can learn something. And that's what happened for me most of the time. But besides the knowledge, there is something else that we find on these forums. And I think it's a symptom of a cultural problem that exists not just on Stack Overflow or Twitter or Slack Spaces or wherever we're gathering online. It's a problem with the entire tech community. This is a screenshot of a Google search that I did in an incognito window, so it is not influenced by my search history. It says, I've typed, "Why are programmers?" And the autocomplete is suggesting things including, "so rude, socially awkward, so arrogant, such douchebags." This is what people think of when they imagine a programmer. The antisocial, condescending attitude that tells people to RTFM, that mocks people who call HTML a programming language. I don't think this is a shock to any of us, right? We know this is how the rest of the world thinks about us. And it's how we think of ourselves a lot of the time. A friend of mine suggested on Twitter that conferences should have a code of conduct. And someone responded this way: "You demand too much from nerds that lost a lot of social skills as a trade-off to be good." Think about that. This person, they're not saying they're concerned about a code of conduct being misused by bad actors. They're not concerned about freedom of expression or something like that. They are saying that we are not capable of treating each other with respect and kindness because it's incompatible with being good technologists. In the tech community, we have too long accepted this as a given, that programmers are just shitty human beings. And we see this behavior in tech leaders all the time. Some of the biggest names in tech have reputations for being jerks. A prominent example is Linux creator Linus Torvalds, who's been known for his rude behavior, profanity, and personal outbursts for years. There is an entire subreddit dedicated to his rants and outbursts on the Linux kernel mailing list. A New Yorker article highlighted Torvalds' approach. The emails of the celebrated programmer Linus Torvalds land like thunderbolts from on high onto public lists, full of invective, insults, and demeaning language. "Please just kill yourself now. The world will be a better place," he wrote in one. So Torvalds has defended his style for years, saying that's just who he is. He despises being nice. He doesn't believe in political correctness. He's not empathetic. And that since his culture includes cursing, telling him not to curse at people is being insensitive to him. Now, he's been successfully managing the Linux kernel development for 20 years, more than that now. And he's argued that his no bullshit approach has made him successful. Maybe it is working. But it's definitely kept some people from wanting to contribute to that project. And it's promoted this idea that technical communities are full of condescending jerks. And it's not just him. This attitude exists all over. I mentioned using a PHP forum earlier, and I've pulled a quote from a post there. "Oh, and by the way, I don't come here to help ungrateful, whiny babies. So stop acting like a child and remember this is a free help forum. Way to ensure you won't get my help again. This is why I don't usually write code for people. They act like assholes even when you give them what they want." Does that sound like someone who's actually trying to help that person? That was me. I wrote that in 2013. I resented customers who asked stupid questions. I picked on my coworkers who annoyed me for stupid reasons, and I criticized their code for equally stupid reasons. I would talk with the other programmers about what idiots basically everyone else was. I worked at a company with a manual QA team overseas at one point, and I remember seeing them as the enemy. Like, who did they think they were to find bugs in my code? Okay. I remember I had one coworker who wanted to introduce unit testing, and I refused to even consider or listen to his arguments, which is probably pretty shocking to anyone who works with me now. And by the way, I'm doing a session later about test-driven development and behavior-driven development. I love TDD. Tests are life, so please come see that later. So in reality, as far as my technical skills were concerned, I was on the expert beginner stage of my growth as a developer. In his blog post titled How Developers Stop Learning, Rise of the Expert Beginner, Eric Dietrich explains how he learned to bowl not by actually putting his fingers in the bowling ball, but kind of just holding it and chucking it down the lane. And he got pretty good at doing that way until he stopped improving. Eric writes how his manager explained to him how he could improve. There's nothing you can do to improve as long as you keep bowling like that. You've maxed out. If you want to get better, you're going to have to learn how to bowl properly. You need a different ball, a different style of throwing it, and you need to put your fingers in it like a big boy. The worst part is you're going to get worse before you get better, and it will be a good bit of time before you get back to and surpass your current average. Eric goes on to explain the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition and how when one can quickly learn skills in an isolated environment, they can get stuck in this offshoot phase that stalls their development, called the expert beginner. For years, I worked like this, writing code that was okay, because someone gave me a task in some project management software, and constantly being angry at everyone who asked me for anything. In April of 2014, my boss said we were going to a PHP conference, and I didn't even know such a thing existed. I was honestly not super excited about having to be around that many people I didn't know. I've never been really great with strangers. Like, my nightmare is when I'm at the self-checkout and the cashier comes over to talk to me, right? Because I'm like, I have my earbuds in, I don't want to talk to you. And there's plenty of times that I don't necessarily want to talk to the people that I know and love. So anyway, we went to the conference, and it was this amazing experience of listening to people explaining technology and how I could use it. And it was okay that I didn't already know how to do that. Everyone was really encouraging, and it was just a lot of fun overall. This is a photo of me and Adam Culp, who's another conference organizer. He used to work for Zend, and I won a drawing to get this big Zend PHP elephant. And I was extra grouchy because I was like 8 months pregnant at this time, but it was still a fun conference. We went back to Lone Star again the next year, 2015. And in between the sessions, I got to talk to Ben Ramsey. Now, Ben has done and continues to do a lot of work in the PHP community, including organizing conferences and user groups and writing really popular libraries. So I remember talking to him, and I said something along the lines of, "It's so cool that you get to do this. I wish I could do this sort of thing." And he said something like, "You can. Everyone has something they can share." It was totally okay that I didn't know so much of this information. And there were all these people who wanted to share, and they did it in a way that didn't make me feel like an idiot. They were encouraging me to be a part of it. At some point, I had to start thinking about what it meant when someone else didn't know some piece of information that I did. One evening in December of 2016, I got a text message from a friend of mine. His text said, "Do you know how to make an Android app?" I responded, "In theory, yes." I figured I could probably figure it out, right? I thought he had some business idea. Maybe he wants to make the next Flappy Bird, right? And then my friend responded, and he spent the next hour texting with me. And he told me how his friend's 18-year-old daughter had been in a coma and had just woken up. A month prior, she had had an arteriovenous malformation, which is a tangle of abnormal blood vessels connecting arteries and veins in your brain. And 2 hours after that, she had life-saving surgery to remove a portion of her brain the size of a kiwi fruit in order to stop the swelling and bleeding. And she was in a coma for 31 days. When she woke up from the coma, the only thing she could do was blink. She couldn't move, anything else. And they were not eligible to get the fancy eye-tracking software and hardware that would have made it possible for her to communicate. They were communicating entirely through blink once for yes and twice for no. Her family had to guess at things that she might want. She had no way to tell them, I'm thirsty, or my head hurts, or I want to watch TV. And they had no way of knowing if she was even capable of understanding these thoughts anymore, let alone communicating them. So my friend asked me, could I make an app for him that would just cycle through the alphabet so that she could blink at the letter she wanted and spell words? And I told him, okay, I can't make an Android app, not right now, but I can make you a website. Will that work? So I sat down and I spent 45 minutes making an app in Vue, and it just let you swipe through the alphabet. They liked it. I threw the generated files onto Amazon S3 and sent them the URL. And for several weeks, they were able to use that site to communicate while Livia recovered and went through physical therapy. A few months later, she was walking again. She still has a lot of recovery ahead of her, but she's doing really good now. So there I was, spending 45 minutes to create something in a new language I didn't know. I was not a JavaScript developer. I had not used Vue, but it seemed like an easy way to make this. I wrote horrible code that my front-end developer friends would have made fun of for someone that I didn't even know, without knowing if it actually would help, because it might. So why couldn't I spend 5 extra minutes to do good code review, to write thoughtful comments that would help the people around me? Why was I so angry at people who had done nothing but ask for my help, or simply exist in the same world around me? Why did I resent the people who used the products that I built and get annoyed that they didn't understand how software works? There's something that makes it so obvious that Livia was deserving of my help. And I guess it wasn't so obvious at first that everyone deserved that. I was stuck on the expert beginner stage of being a basic human adult being. Just like Eric had to relearn how to bowl properly, I needed to relearn how to treat the people around me. I needed a different style of throwing the ball. I wasn't trying to be an asshole. I wasn't, as another tweet I saw recently said, waking up every day and deciding to fuck with everyone. It wasn't a deliberate choice. The Upgrade by the Life Hacker did an episode called How to Not Be a Dick, where they interviewed a former childhood bully named Jeffrey. In the interview, Jeffrey mentioned several times about how angry he was as a teenager. He describes being as young as 5 years old, playing baseball, and he could pitch a perfect game, but the team still lost by 1 point, so he would lock himself in the room and cry because he felt an intense pressure to be perfect. In the interview, he says, I didn't come home every day and think, wow, I'm a bully. I thought, I'm cool, I'm great, I'm a tough guy, and don't mess with me because I'll start a fight with you. The victim of Jeffrey's bullying, Eric, chimes in to describe how he felt like Jeffrey was a giant because of how aggressive he was. But in reality, Eric was about a foot taller. As the interview goes on, Jeffrey explains how he later had to ask himself, why am I so angry? We get angry at people who ask bad questions because they're wasting our time. We get angry that they're not working as hard as we think they should be. We're angry at people who challenge the way we do things. We're angry at people that we think are some kind of a threat. Anger is usually a secondary emotion, meaning it stems from another emotion entirely. Behind a lot of this anger is fear. we naturally try to fight the things that we are most insecure about. Sometimes pointing out that we know the answer makes us feel better about our unacknowledged fear that we don't know other answers. In the interview, Jeffrey describes his fear of not being good enough. Even when he succeeded, if it wasn't good enough, if it wasn't perfect, he still felt fear and guilt. Sometimes when we tell other people it's easy, just read the manual, what we're really saying is, I need to convince myself it's easy. All you have to do is read the manual, because I'm scared to admit that there aren't always easy answers. Sometimes we're unintentionally pointing out how much smarter than we are than the question asker by using words like simple, just, easy. We can alleviate a lot of this fear and anger by substituting it with empathy. Now, I was not raised in an environment where empathy was encouraged. I don't think it was something that I had ever even heard people talk about until a couple years ago when I saw Samantha Quinones talk about empathy. And it would be easy for me to say that because I wasn't raised with this as an important value, that it's not my fault that I didn't get it, and I could have kept using that excuse to defend my behavior. But after seeing other people practicing empathy in their everyday lives, and seeing examples of successful people who are making a difference and living without that constant fear and anger, I had to acknowledge that I had a problem. And it was possible to be both a good developer and a kinder, respectful, compassionate person. I know I've never been satisfied seeing a problem go unsolved, and I saw a problem in my own behavior. And the same thing happened for Linus Torvalds. I spoke earlier about how he has been an example of some of the negative stereotypes of programmers. Last year, Torvalds made a surprising announcement when, after he accidentally created some scheduling conflicts to avoid the yearly Linux kernel summit, he was confronted by his community about his behavior. Torvalds wrote, "This week, people in our community confronted me about my lifetime of not understanding emotions. My flippant attacks and emails have been both unprofessional and uncalled for, especially at times when I made it personal. In my quest for a better patch, this made sense to me. I now know this was not okay, and I'm truly sorry." There's a comedy podcast I listen to called My Brother and Me, and it's hosted by Justin Travis and Griffin McElroy. And they actually taught me a lot about respecting people. When they first started their show, they were just messing around, and they made a lot of jokes that didn't age well. In particular, in one episode, they made a joke about furries, and then they were pretty mean in an attempt to be funny. And then they got letters from some of their listeners saying, "Hey, I really like you guys, but I'm a furry, and what you said really hurt my feelings." So they had two choices at that point. They could be defensive and pull that whole, "It's just a joke, lighten up," right? Or they could apologize, admit they were insensitive, and change their behavior. And they chose the second option. They apologized, and they started making an effort to be more empathetic. They grew as comedians, and they created and nurtured this amazing, welcoming, inclusive community based around encouragement and comedy that isn't cruel. And they went on to grow that podcast into a TV show. They have several spin-off podcasts. They do national tours. And they recently had the graphic novel adaptation of one of their shows be #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Justin McElroy published a blog post several years ago titled, "What It Has Taken Me 33 Years to Learn." And the first item on the list is you can be funny and kind or funny and cruel. The second one is easier, but the first one is worth it. So for me, I had to learn that I can be a programmer and be cruel to the people around me, or I can be a programmer and be respectful, kind, helpful, and encouraging. And it's actually not easier to be mean. Maybe it is in comedy, but not in our regular lives. It might seem like it is at first, but I was hurting myself and the people around me. It's easier to be kind even if it means I take 3 times as long to write a response to a customer, because instead of just linking them to the documentation, I go look at their site, find the settings they have enabled for the plugin that we have, send them a running code snippet of the changes they'll need to make. It's easier, it's better in the long run for me and for them. The post that I mentioned from the PHP forum in that last post that I ever made on there, I solved their problem that day. I gave them code. I helped them. But what do you think that they walked away from that thinking about me and about the programming community? What was the overall sum of positive and negative effects that went out into the world because of that exchange? What about my recent email to my customer, where I helped them without needing to imply that they were an idiot, which would be absolutely unacceptable in any professional situation, but it still happens. There's a reason that a lot of programmers aren't allowed to talk to customers. When I had a chance there, I practiced empathy. I understood how much time and effort this customer had put into fixing his site, and I knew how frustrating it was and how helpless he felt when he finally had to ask us to fix it. Now, I'm not trying to say that I'm perfect. I still make a lot of mistakes. We don't have to be perfect. But we have to get rid of this idea that programmers are hostile jerks. We have to start treating each other with more respect and empathy. Now, most of the time when we talk about empathy, we're referring to what's known as emotional or affective empathy, which means being able to respond to someone else's emotions with an appropriate emotion. There's another aspect to empathy known as cognitive empathy, or the ability to understand another person's perspective. I think a lot of the conflict that we deal with could be reduced, at least in part, if we work on our cognitive empathy. So often, we don't take the time to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and it's easier to dismiss them when we don't empathize with their experiences. It can be really hard to understand just how different other people's experiences have been from our own. So we don't try. It's easier to dismiss it. I want to try an experiment, and I would like everyone to close their eyes. I want you to imagine yourself on a beach. Imagine the blue-green waves crashing against the shore. Imagine your toes digging into the white sand. Think about the sounds of seagulls flying overhead looking for food. Think about the smell of the salt water. Maybe there's beautiful palm trees on your beach, or a fire pit in the sand, or folks are making s'mores. All right, open your eyes. I want you to raise your hand if you would use the words pictured or visualized to describe what you just did. If in your mind you saw yourself on a beach, maybe it looked like this one. My husband says he pictures the beach from the movie Contact. Maybe some of you would even say you smelled the salt water or the fire pit, or you heard the sounds of the waves or the seagulls. This is what I see. There is no such thing as visualization for me. I have no mind's eye. This is it. I have aphantasia, which is the inability to produce visual images in my mind. I don't have any other senses in my mind. Conversations in my head are only in my voice. There is no smell or taste in my mind. There's a part of your brain that lights up on an MRI when you see an image, and the same part lights up when you picture an image in your mind, unless you have aphantasia and cannot picture things. Now, I didn't find this out until last year, when a friend of mine, a coworker, shared an article about aphantasia, and I had to start asking my friends if they really could see things in their mind. I had gone my whole life so far thinking everyone was just being super metaphorical when they talked about visualization. And I didn't understand that the vast majority of people mean that they actually picture things. Until I read about the 2% of people who don't picture things. So when I figured this out, it made a lot of sense for me. And it kind of explained why I thought flowery language describing scenes in novels was silly. But my friends couldn't understand what I was going through. My friends would ask me, do you mean you just see black and white? No, absolutely no picture. This is what I see when I close my eyes. It's the back of my eyelids. So to so many people, the experience of not being able to visualize things is unimaginable. They cannot put themselves in my shoes any more than I can close my eyes and picture myself on the beach. But I can think about the beach, right? When I imagine things, I don't see them, but I know what they look like. This is my daughter on a beach. I just wanted to share this picture because it's super cute. So I will never see that picture in my head. I know what her face looks like, but I can't see it. So we're talking about something that honestly has very little impact. I was able to go 32 years of my life without realizing that my brain worked differently than 98% of people's. So it wasn't keeping me from doing anything important. So when my friends are not able to understand what I mean when I say I see nothing, it doesn't matter. How do we handle it when it's something that does matter? Do we dismiss that person's experience because we can't put ourselves in their position, because we have no context for what they've gone through? We're going to skip ahead a little bit because I ran out of time. Sorry, folks. So I would love it if you could go and read that post that Justin McElroy wrote about things that it's taken him a long time to learn. There's a lot of great stuff on there in the links that are in the bit.ly link. There's tons of good resources. So I just want to wrap up by saying it's okay if you still don't like talking to people. I don't. I'm always happy to talk to anyone at conferences, anyone who emails me, but I still have anxiety. I don't like it when that cashier talks to me at the checkout because, like I said, I have both of my earbuds in. Why are you trying to talk to me? It's the self-checkout. I don't know. Maybe she's trying to do it because her boss makes her. Maybe her kids all moved away and she doesn't have anyone to talk to. It doesn't help anything for me to be mean to her or angry about it. It doesn't solve any problems. And solving problems is why I got into programming, to solve problems for people. And I forgot about that for a while, that the paycheck only keeps coming because the code I'm writing is solving a problem for someone. The lack of empathy, understanding, respect, compassion, community in tech is a problem. And we are all responsible for solving it. With the software that we write, the tickets we respond to, the jokes we make, and the actions that we take every day, we are making changes in the world. And we are responsible for making things better. So let's go do it. Thank you very much.